I have right here a Game Boy that was not made or licensed or endorsed or associated with Nintendo. It plays Game Boy games, but it is not made by Nintendo. What is going on here? So as I said, this is a Game Boy that plays your original Game Boy games and looks exactly like a Game Boy, but was not made by Nintendo. Here is an official Nintendo Game Boy, and immediately you can tell that there is a few differences. Ignore the fact that some of the lettering has slightly rubbed off. Obviously, that is an indication of its somewhat cheaper build, but there is actually meant to be an A and a B there, and obviously this is a little bit smudged, and so is the Start and Select. But you can see it's missing a few of the defining features of the Game Boy. For example, the extension port is not there. The contrast wheel over here is actually on the top. The contrast wheel here is on the top up here. The DC in should be on the side, but is now on the top. And they've actually done a new piece of the injection mold to indicate where the DC jack is. The power switch is in the exact same position. Over here, we've got the headphone jack in the place of the DC when it should be on the bottom. And then there's absolutely nothing on that side and nothing on the bottom. On the back, we've got our cartridge slot on the top, and we've got our battery cover. Was this trying to pass as an actual Nintendo Game Boy? I think so. I've got a couple of other DMG hardware clones, ignore the fact that the lens just fell off that one, which obviously look just a little bit different, but they still play your original Nintendo Game Boy games. So this one I think was really genuinely trying to pass off as an actual Game Boy. Now before we take a look at it and what's inside and how it functions, we need to have a look at some of the history behind it and why this thing actually exists. Now I need to give a big shout out to a Patreon of mine, W, who messaged me in Discord saying that he had found this. He put up a little message saying that he had been keeping his eye on this auction for 2 fake clone Nintendo Game Boys, and unfortunately he missed it. I caught wind of that and said, wow, does that Polish auction site have any more? And he said, well, I'll take a look. Lo and behold, this one exists. Not only did he order it to his house and then take the liberty to ship it forward to me, but he took obviously hours of research finding out about this thing through all of the Polish websites and newsletters and articles that he could find, and has now given us all of the information that we need. So I'm going to read it all out whilst playing you some nice B-roll. In the box, you got the console, earphones, batteries, but no game. There is a power jack, but no official AC adapter was released. It was released in 1993 or 1994 by a company called Bob Mark, a company that distributed Taiwanese Famicom clones in Poland under the name Pegasus. We got the MT777DX and the IQ502 models, and later Power Pegasus 16-bit, a clone of the Mega Drive. And finally, the Pegasus Game Boy. We're not entirely sure why this one has the Nintendo Game Boy logo on it, because most of the other ones say Pegasus, so it's quite interesting. Maybe this one is a different revision. These consoles became less popular after 1996 when the PlayStation 1 was released. Bob Mark attempt to survive on the market by becoming official distributors of Sega. They failed though. However, the company is still functional and they now specialize in fizzy drinks. Because of Pegasus, early NES games have a cult following in Poland, but since Nintendo never had, and still doesn't have, official presence in Poland, Nintendo games are still obscure. Only recently, the Nintendo Switch is becoming more and more relevant. Pegasus Game Boy is pretty rare, even in Poland. The original Game Boy and subsequent releases were imported by toy companies and became popular thanks to the Pokemon cartoon. There were commercials on TV, definitely Game Boys were more relevant than any other Nintendo console in Poland. As for the prices, the console was $65 USD in 1993, which is the equivalent of $115 now. As for a little context, the average monthly salary in Poland in 1993 was $200 US, which now is only $354. So yes, this would have been quite an expensive Game Boy in the day. So there we go, big thank you to my Patreon W for sharing that information with me in the Patreon exclusive Discord chat. So this is it, and my god, am I excited by it. There is immediate signs and telltale signs that this is not official. Obviously, I pointed out some of them already, but I'll give you a few more before we take a look at how it functions. The finish of the plastic is completely different. This sort of has a texture to it, whereas this is completely smooth. The button molds, I have to say, are very good, and the plastic doesn't feel too low quality compared to some of the other things that I've seen. They really obviously tried their very best to clone the Game Boy. Now, one interesting thing is the screen that is in this is the exact same screen that's in this and the exact same screen that's in this. So I'm fairly certain there was sort of a standard clone screen on the market that these companies were snapping up. And there is actually another console that uses the same screen called the Gamate, but that was not a Game Boy clone, it was its own hardware thing. But yeah, this is a really, really cool device. So if I show you it turning on, it will just straight away load the Nintendo logo there and does not have the sort of scrolling down on the screen intro that most original Game Boys have. The speaker is absolutely awful. That's about the only audible level, and if you turn it up more, it distorts through the roof. That's probably because it's a really low quality speaker, but it could also be down to the fact that it's broken slightly over the years. But yeah, besides that, everything is normal, other than one pretty major thing, the speed. You can definitely hear that it is a little bit fast. But hey, it's fully functional, and if you didn't have an original Game Boy side by side next to this one, you definitely wouldn't have known at all. There is really no way of knowing that this wasn't the actual original Nintendo Game Boy. So you can definitely see how they would have fooled quite a lot of people on the market. Now, I paid around 100 British pounds for it, which is around 120 US dollars, which seems to be, going off what some of the other clones have sold for, a pretty fair price. But even if you had $120 set aside to buy one of these things, good luck ever finding one. So let's take it apart, because as far as everything else is concerned from the outside, it's just a hardware clone, and it runs your Game Boy games, albeit fast, fairly well. I think when we start taking it apart, we're going to see some more somewhat interesting things. So as for the screws, they are obviously not tri-wing. And you may notice as well that this screw is a little bit lower down, presumably because there is something up here, could be the headphone jack or something, but that does look quite funny compared to the original Game Boy. But we'll take it apart further. I don't think this has been opened before, but one of the screws is actually a different size. So maybe whoever had it before me has opened it. Okay, now another immediate telltale sign is the battery contacts. You can see that they are very different in shape. The battery contact doesn't come to a smaller diameter at the end. It's all exactly the same size the whole way across, and that is exactly the same with this as well. So I'm fairly certain there is quite a lot of similarities in the Game Boy clone industry. Presumably they probably got all their parts from the same supplier. So there we go. There is the inside, and if you have taken apart a Game Boy clone before, that looks very, very similar. Exactly the same as the KF2000. We've all seen what the inside of a Nintendo Game Boy looks like, an official one. There's two different motherboards, one on the back which deals with the actual guts of the Game Boy, the power and the audio, and obviously has the cartridge slot, and then the front one is for the button inputs and the screen. So this does look very different. There is actually another motherboard under here, which I'll show you in just a second once we take this off, but we've got a separate PCB here, which deals with the buttons and obviously the audio, and then we've got one up here, which is going to deal with the running of the games, the motherboard, and then we've got the screen on the front. Now, I don't think that there's any screws holding that down, so we should be able to just wiggle it off. Now, I really want to be very, very careful here not to damage anything, considering how rare this is. But yeah, let's, ooh, that's really not coming out very well. Maybe what we should do is undo the screws on here, because I think there's a sort of a header pin connecting the screen and this button PCB together. So I can feel there that there's a bit of a resistance here, and you can see the ends of the header pins there. So let's apply a little bit of pressure up in that corner to pull it off. There we go. Boom. Okay, and yeah, that is exactly the same. I'll see if I've got some footage, but that is absolutely identical to the other ones that I've seen. The only difference being the power indicator, which seems to be present on some, but not others. You can see it's not on this one, but it is on this one. So yeah, as far as that's concerned, that's all exactly the same. And really, I think this is as well. So I do think there is some sort of industry standard in the clone world going on. The only immediate difference I can see compared to the KF2000 is that this has a really nice sort of header pin connector here, which connects it to the motherboard. What I had in there was a sort of flex cable that eventually broke, and I had to solder each wire individually. Another thing that's really interesting is you can see on the front of this PCB, on the silk screen, it says SY3000, which is another Game Boy clone, a completely different one to the Pegasus. Obviously, they have just been using the different parts. Now, I'm trying to have a look around on here and to see if I can find anything else, but it looks like it just says WS01. Usually, it says the name of the console on there. For example, this one said the KF2000 on there. So, yeah, obviously, just a load of shared parts, but that is the main guts of the Game Boy, and it really doesn't look too dissimilar, and it's actually fairly clean. This one is a really nice example of a hardware clone. Often with these things, it's really cheap and really messy, but this one actually looks fairly good. So I'm super, super excited about this. So let's take a quick look at the buttons. So as you can see, they all look exactly the same as original official Nintendo ones, with a few interesting exceptions. Why is that? Why was that like that? That's really bizarre. That was this little peg was on another hole next to the original hole. That's really obscure. But yeah, you can see here these have obviously just been molded to be exactly the same as the original Nintendo ones. They were a little bit different in this, but obviously in this one the buttons are completely different. So this really is trying to completely copy the original Nintendo Game Boy. As with the D-pad, everything is exactly the same in terms of design, but it's clearly a different mold. This has sort of got a bevel to it, whereas this is completely flat. So yeah, and obviously it's a little bit thinner as well. You might be able to see that there. But they have really done a very good job. Next up then, we've got the action buttons and the corresponding membrane. This is unreal. If I dropped this on the table and had my original one next to it, there is no way you would know. It seems to be absolutely identical. It's the same with the action button membranes. Looking up close, you can see some differences, but from a distance, it looks exactly the same. You can definitely feel some quality differences in the actual silicone itself, but blimey, that is a fairly good copy. It's quite scary, really. I wonder if Nintendo, they must have known that this sort of stuff exists, but the structure chart of the company must have been so convoluted they probably even couldn't find out who owned who was doing all the dirty work. But yeah, start and select look exactly the same as well. It's really, really weird. But that is pretty much it. I found this sort of stuff really interesting. Hopefully you have as well. Hardware Game Boy clones. Who would have known? I forgot to show you the power switch as well. Really close, really, really similar, but obviously a few differences. But yeah, that is pretty much going to conclude this video. Again, a huge thank you to W for making this happen. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye.